Hi, this is Geri from Ether Security Lab, and in this video we're going to solve the third challenge of the Flare On Challenges 2019. This challenge is called Flare Bear, and before we get into it, first of all, the big lesson for me was not to overthink stuff too much. I intentionally left these tabs and all the open applications here just to give you a glimpse of how much stuff I worked on, just so that I can realize at the end that you can solve the challenge on paper practically. But we'll get there. First, what the challenge is about. If you download FlareBear and unpack it, you will get an APK file and a message which says, "We are at Flare, created our own Tamagotchi pet, the FlareBear. He's very fussy, keep him alive and happy, and he will give you the flag." So APK files are Android applications. So to run it, we will need some kind of emulator. I ended up trying multiple things. This is the official Android Studio emulator, but it's actually not really necessary and it's just too much work to get it running. I mostly used a tool called Nox. Apparently, there's a whole new market of Android emulators for people who play Android games on PC. I did not know that this existed, but it does, and because of that, there are a bunch of emulators out there. Their advantage compared to the Android Studio is that they are much easier to use than installing the whole studio. But anyway, let's see the game. I right click on the file, open with, and I choose noxplayer. That starts up the emulator. If we go back to the home screen, you will see that there is a FlareBear app, and when it started, you can choose a new FlareBear. Let's call your bear Teddy. And let's go. We have this bear and we can do three things. Feed it, play with it, and at some point it poops, which we can clean up. Let me poop a little bit. So now we can clean up the poops. Now there is no poop. That's all the game does. The first rabbit hole for me that I went down was that, as in the previous challenge, I tried to do everything to manipulate this application into giving me the flag. If you haven't seen that challenge, you will find it in the description. You probably know that Android applications are mostly Java code. The APK file can be unzipped or just opened with a tool. We can use APK tool and then decompile it back to Java, so we can actually look at the Java source code. That's pretty great, and through an intermediate language called Smally, or I think that's how it's pronounced, you can manipulate the code as well, rebuild it back to an APK and run the manipulated code. But as I said, this was a huge waste of time in this case. You can still try it though, just for the sake of learning, because that's the whole point of this CTF. Now, let's look at the source code. We have the APK file. There are a bunch of tools that you can use to decompile Java code generally, or Android Java code. The one I use is called JetX, because it has a nice graphical user interface. You can download it from the internet and then just run the batch file. Once running, we open the FlareBear APK. As you can see, it's pretty awesome. We have the source code for our Android application. There is a main activity, and there is a FlareBear activity, credits, and some build config. If you remember, there was a credits button in the main screen. However, probably the interesting part of the application is the FlareBear activity, because that's where everything happens when you have the FlareBear screen in front of you. At this point, we are just looking for something interesting that could lead us to the flag. Here we can see all the functions in the FlareBear activity, and here is the code for the whole class. We can search for the string flag. I check all these boxes. These are the Android classes. They are not really interesting for us. For us, it's interesting if it's in the com.fire.flarebear namespace. There is one, and it's called Dance with Flag. That sounds fun, so let's check it out. These are two things I like, dancing and flags. Alright, I lied. I only like flags. Anyway, there is something with ecstatic here. We are reading some bytes, and there is a getPassword function and some decryption. It calls the dance function, and then the dance function draws something. Since the getPassword doesn't take any inputs, we assume it's some kind of hard-coded password that is used for the decryption. What could be interesting is to look at where this dance with flag function is called. Let's say find usage, and it's only called in one place in the setMood function. So you can see that the setMood function is looking at isHappy. We will take a look at what that means, but probably it means that the bear is happy and then we are setting up the other view when the bear looks happy. If the bear is happy, then we check whether it's ecstatic. In that case, we call the dance with flags. And then here at the end, you can see that if these are not true, then we will go into sad. So to summarize, our bear has these three states: happy, ecstatic, and sad. So let's take a look at where is this setMood coming from. Again, click find usage, and it is called at this clean function. We are not exactly sure when this happens though. It saves the activity. We still need to figure out what that means. Then removes all the poo, cleans the UI, change mess, change to happy, and change to clean. So probably we'll need to get to this point when we call dance with flag to actually get the flag. And for that, the bear has to reach the ecstatic state. Now let's try to figure out what happens when we click the buttons. We are clicking either feed, play, or clean buttons. If you look at the functions, it's pretty obvious. There is a function called clean. That's what we have seen before. It changes the mess to 0, changes the happiness with -1, changes the cleanliness with 6, and calls the setMood. Then there is a function called play, which saves the activity P, changes mess with -2, changes happy with 4, change clean with -1. Then there is a feed function, which it saves activity F, changes mess with 10, changes happy with 2, change clean with -1, and increment poo count. So we found out a couple of important things. All these actions we do are changing these counters. Apparently, there are these state counters for the bear, mess, happiness, and cleanliness. Then there is this save activity function that could be interesting. So let's look at that. Apparently it creates a string and it appends the activity that we save. This is going to be important later. We could just assume that this is a log of what activities have been called, because every time we call an activity, it's going to be appended to this state. So it's a kind of history of the called actions. Now, before I go to the solution, I would like to talk about the rabbit holes that I went into, because it's important for you to see that this still counts as a simple challenge, but it is really easy to get lost in the technology and lose focus. So when I started this challenge, I spent hours figuring out stuff while the final solution was actually just a couple of minutes. Even though these hours I spent on trying to solve it was absolutely not a waste of time, because I learned a lot from these failed attempts. I did some Android testing in the past, a long time ago, and it was a really good refresher to look in and how to do these things on Android. Of course, once I figured out the solution, I kind of gave myself a huge facepalm, but you know, that's life. So the rabbit hole I went into was that I tried to modify the application to actually call the dance with flag function without actually doing anything with the application. I wanted to cheat the whole app, and I tried various ways. First, I tried to just remove this whole function, then just call dance with flags. That didn't work. Then I tried to change the isHappy and isEcstatic functions to always return true. Then I changed all these other functions to always call dance with flags. None of these worked. I don't really know whether I screwed something up with the modification of the application. Sometimes I also crashed the application, which obviously showed that something didn't work. I tried to debug the Smolly code. It should be possible to run the application in the Android emulator, and there is a plugin for Android Studio where you can connect to the emulator through a debug port, and theoretically you can actually debug the Smolly code as the application runs. It didn't work for me either. I think that was the moment when I started to look at the source code again, and I finally got to the final solution. I got back to the Java code and figured that I will just try to really understand what are the requirements to get the flag. So I started to look at these functions to figure out how I could satisfy them without actually modifying the application. So that's what we are going to do now. First, let's look at isHappy. It says get stat f and get stat p. Then stat needs to be greater or equal to 2, but less than equal than 2.5. So what is get stat? Get stat loads something, get string activity. So this is where we get back to the save activity function. we are loading back those save activities. The save activity was also called with these letters. So obviously F is for feeding, P is for playing, and C is for cleaning. To find out whether the flare bear is happy, we're looking at the feeding activities and the playing activities. Getstat is just iterating through the save activities and counting how many times these letters appear in that string. Basically, that's how the activities are stored. Every time you call save activity with the letter is just appended to this string. And when you are calling getstat, then you are counting how many times this letter is in that string, which basically tells you how many times feeding or playing or cleaning was invoked. This means that the isHappy function really means that the ratio of feeding and playing must be between 2 and 2.5. So that's a requirement we can write down. Now let's go back to setMood. So that was setMood isHappy, and we get there and we get here, the bear is going to be very happy. Now we have to figure out what ecstatic means. So we are looking at the state again. The state has 3 parameters: mess, happiness, and cleanliness. We can look into the getState function, but that's not too interesting. It's just loading the current values of the parameter. The interesting part is the condition that we have to satisfy to make our bear ecstatic. We need the bear to have 72 mess, 30 happiness, and 0 cleanliness. These are the conditions that we need to satisfy to get the flag. We have to have the feeding playing ratio between 2 and 2.5, have 72 mess, 30 happiness, and 0 cleanliness. And to figure out how to satisfy this, we go back to the functions that are called when an action is done. I will write this down. So play costs us -2 mess, 4 happiness, and -1 cleanliness. And go back to feed. Feed is 10 mess, 2 happiness, and -1 cleanliness. And the clean is 0 mess, -1 happiness, which I can totally understand. I'm also not too happy when I'm cleaning. And then 6 cleanliness. And our conditions were mess must be equal to 72, happiness must be equal to 30, and cleanliness must be equal to 0. You can create some kind of very sophisticated math to solve this. I just went with the simple and stupid. I just figured that we need 72 mess, so we have to do at least 8 times feeding, and that would bring us to 80 mess, 16 happiness, and -8 cleanliness. Alright, now obviously we need to bring down the mess to 72, so for that we need to do 4 times play, and that will get us to 72 mess, and 32 happiness, and -12 cleanliness. And the good thing with cleaning is that it doesn't cost mess, so it's not going to ruin the mess, which is set to the right number at this point. And from the 32, we need to get to 30 happiness. So that's perfect, because we can do 2 cleanings that will leave the mess at 72. We will also get our 30 happiness, and it will also bring down the cleanliness to 0. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. With these actions, we satisfy the requirements to be ecstatic, but we also need to check whether we satisfy the isHappy function's requirements as well. That was the ratio between feeding and playing must be between 2 and 2.5. If you look back the actions we did, we do exactly twice as much feeding than playing, so that should work with the happiness requirements as well. So altogether, this seems like a good solution. Let's go back to the emulator and try it. I will restart, I will create a new flare bear called teddybear2, and let's see. So our solution was 8 feeding. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 4 plays. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 2 cleaning. 1, 2. And the bear is ecstatic. Amazing. So this is the solution. And as you can see, we get the flag as well. So with that, we solved the Flare Bear challenge of the 2019 Flare On challenges. As I said before, the lessons learned from this challenge, for me at least, was not to overcomplicate the work and try to understand what we want to achieve before we go into random solutions. But anyway, it was fun. Check it out yourself, and if you like this video or the channel, then subscribe or like or share with other people. Otherwise, we will meet in the next one. So thanks for watching and happy hacking. Bye.